The night Lagos breathed its usual chaos. Horns blared in the distance, the streetlights flickered with the city's irregular electricity supply, and the scent of roasted suya danced through the thick air. On the third mainland bridge, cars were thinning as midnight approached, except for one black G-Wagon gliding past like a shadow with purpose. Inside sat Chief Chukwunwosu, a billionaire real estate mogul whose name echoed from Ikoyi boardrooms to Abuja political tables. He had just finalized a cash deal worth over 850 million naira, something sensitive enough to require discretion. Against his security detail's advice, he'd chosen to handle the transport of the money himself, packed neatly into a thick silver briefcase lying at the foot of the passenger seat. It was supposed to be a quiet ride home to his Banana Island mansion, but just past the Ayana Oworo turn, fate made its first move. 3 motorcycles with masked riders emerged from nowhere, zigzagging in front of him like mosquitoes dancing in floodlight. Chuka's instincts told him to floor the accelerator, but before his foot touched the pedal, a heavy log slammed the hood. His vehicle screeched and veered into the side gutter. The airbags exploded. Dazed and half-breathless, Chuka barely registered the chaos that followed. The door flung open. He was dragged out like a sack of yam. 4 armed men, faces covered in tattered black scarves, surrounded him. One snatched the briefcase. Another pushed a pistol against his temple. They demanded his phone, his wallet, his watch, but Chuka's grip on the briefcase tightened. He didn't care about the cash. It was the principle. He was Chukwunwosu. You don't rob a man like him without consequences. That pride got him a gun's blow to the head. As he slumped, blood trickling down his left eyebrow, he could hear their feet shuffling, debating whether to leave him or finish him off. That was when she appeared, like an unintended miracle. Ifeoma had just closed from a double shift at Mainland General Hospital. Her white nurse's gown, though now hidden beneath a blue hoodie and backpack, still carried the scent of antiseptic and worn-out effort. It had been another long day of struggling with short supplies and angry patients. She was tired, bone tired. But rather than take 2 Danfo buses home, she chose to walk the short distance from Iyana Oworo to her cousin's place in Bariga. She didn't expect to see a man lying on the roadside, his blood painting the concrete. At first, she thought it was another unfortunate road victim, but as she tiptoed closer, she noticed the black G-Wagon pushed sideways into the gutter, then the flash of a silver briefcase being kicked open, and bundles of Naira notes flying like feathers in the wind. The men laughed, but they didn't laugh long. Ifeoma didn't scream. She didn't run. Something inside her moved faster than her fear. She saw them stepping away, done with their victim, and in that split second she lunged. Grabbing a jagged stone from the road, she hurled it with all her might at the man nearest to the fallen billionaire. It hit his shoulder, and he turned with rage. But by then, she was already dragging Chuka toward the roadside gutter, shielding his body with hers, shouting for help that would never come. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or foolishness, but somehow the sudden distraction gave the robbers enough hesitation to flee. The one she hit fired a shot into the air, cursed her existence, and sped off with the others, the cash forgotten like scraps at the end of a party. In the eerie silence that followed, Ifeoma bent over the unconscious man and checked for a pulse. Still there, still alive. She called for help again, but no one answered. Cars passed, slowing only slightly before zooming away. Nobody wanted trouble. Nobody stopped for blood. So she lifted him with all her weight and flagged down a Kikinapep. The driver hesitated when he saw blood, but the sight of the man's gold wristwatch and Ifeoma's desperation softened him. Together, they hoisted Chuka's limp frame into the back and zoomed off, bouncing across potholes and prayers toward mainland General. They worked on him for hours. The doctors didn't know who he was, only that he had deep head trauma, a broken rib, and severe blood loss. Ifeoma stood beside the bed as the other nurses came and went. She cleaned his wounds. She adjusted his drip. She whispered words of survival into his ears like lullabies. Nobody paid her any special attention. She was just another nurse doing her job. But inside her, she felt something different. She had never dragged a man from death's door before. Not like this. She didn't even know his name. He was just Patient X to the hospital files. Until the next morning, when the security personnel from Banana Island came storming into the ward. They had tracked the G-Wagon's GPS. They had found the briefcase, unopened, still clutched in Chuka's hand. And they had found Ifeoma's name. Back in his recovery room 2 days later, Chief Chuka finally opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the ceiling fan spinning slowly above his head. The second thing was a young woman asleep on a plastic chair beside his bed, her head resting on her hands, her uniform creased but clean. He blinked slowly. There was confusion in his gaze, but also peace. When he finally asked, with a whisper so light it almost got lost in the hum of the power generator, "Who saved me?" The answer changed everything. They pointed to the sleeping nurse with the tired eyes and fierce spirit. And in that moment, Chief Chukanwosu decided he would not let the woman who brought him back from death walk away like just another nurse. He was a man who believed in rewards. But this was more than reward. This was something deeper, something rare, something he wasn't about to ignore. The news of Chukanwosu's survival spread like wildfire. Within hours, newspapers hinted at an attempted robbery. Some speculated it was politically motivated. Others whispered of betrayal from inside his empire. But while headlines buzzed with speculation, Ifeoma returned quietly to her modest life, unaware that her name had already reached the ears of men who didn't forget debts. She arrived at work the next day with swollen eyes, not from sleep, but from the weight of questions. Did she do the right thing? Was she safe, now that she had interfered with criminals? Would they come for her? And most of all, why did the man she saved look strangely familiar, like someone from the evening news or magazine covers? The hospital was busy, as usual. Emergency cases were flowing in, and nurses like her were never enough. She didn't have the time or luxury to think about the man lying in Ward 5C. Yet somehow, her feet wandered back to his room in between breaks. She told herself it was to check his IV levels or monitor his vitals. But deep down, it was something else. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was responsibility, curiosity, connection. She hadn't even known his name until she overheard 2 guards at the ward door whispering, "That's Chief Chuka, the billionaire of Lekki, the one with 7 companies." Her chest tightened. This man, this half-conscious stranger whose blood had soaked her sleeves, was one of the richest men in Nigeria, and she was just a nurse who hadn't paid her rent in 3 months. Inside the private suite, Chuka lay still. Machines hummed softly beside him. His body was healing, but his mind raced. He remembered flashes, the wet road, the gun pressed to his head, a sharp pain, then darkness. But clearer than all that was the image of a girl's face, hovering above him with worry in her eyes. A stranger who didn't run, a stranger who fought. He had never believed in miracles, but what happened that night felt unexplainable. When his assistant, Mr. Adeoti, arrived with security footage from the hospital's gate and a full report of the night's events, Chuka watched in silence. There she was, dragging him into the kiki, her backpack hanging off one arm, blood streaked on her hoodie, panic on her face. "She's the reason you're alive, sir," Adeoti said softly. Chuka leaned back on the pillows, rubbing his bandaged ribs. "And where is she now?" "She's still working here. Her name is Nurse Ifeoma Obilo, age 28, from Enugu State. Lives with a cousin in Bariga, single. Salary is, let's just say, very humble." Chuka was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Send someone to clear her debts. Quietly. Make sure she never hears of it." "And then?" Adeoti asked. Chuka stared out the window. "Then I'll meet her, myself." Ifeoma noticed the changes before she understood them. Her landlord, who had been threatening to throw her out for weeks, suddenly apologized for some errors in his record and told her she didn't owe anything anymore. Her younger brother's school called to say his fees had been settled for the entire term. The matron at the hospital started assigning her fewer shifts, with more flexibility. She even received a new pair of nursing shoes, anonymously delivered with no note. It was confusing. It was scary. And then came the call. A nurse summoned her to the executive suite on the top floor. She thought it was a mistake. She had never even seen that part of the hospital. But when she arrived, she found Mr. Adeoti waiting with a smile that didn't quite match the surprise in his eyes. "The chief wants to speak with you." She stepped inside, heart pounding. There he was, sitting upright on the bed, his posture noble despite the bandages around his chest and head. He looked at her, really looked, as if memorizing her face. "You," he said, voice hoarse but warm. "You brought me back." Ifeoma froze, unsure whether to nod or flee. Her mouth was dry, but she managed a simple, "I just did what anyone would do." Chuka smiled faintly. "Number not. Everyone would risk their life for a stranger. You didn't know I was rich. You just acted. That is rare." There was silence between them. Not awkward, just heavy with meanings words couldn't explain. "I owe you everything," Chuka continued, "and I don't pay such debts lightly." Before she could object, he added, "I won't insult you with money. That would be too easy. I want to ask you something, when I'm well. Not now. Just wait for me." Then he reached for her hand, not out of gratitude, but something else. A question, a promise. Later that week, Ifeoma's cousin, Chinyere, found her staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror at home. "You've changed," Chinyere said. Ifeoma turned slowly. "How?" "You carry yourself differently, like someone who knows she's being watched, like something inside you woke up." Ifeoma didn't answer, because deep down she felt it too. Her world had shifted, and whatever came next was already on its way. 3 weeks passed. Chief Chukanwosu had fully recovered. The bruises faded, the cuts healed, and the wounds turned to scars he no longer saw as marks of pain, but as reminders of purpose. He was not a man used to weakness. His life had always been about control, conquest, and calculation. But for the first time, he had been helpless, and someone had lifted him when he couldn't even lift himself. Ifeoma Obilo. She wasn't a celebrity. She didn't own a car. She wasn't in anyone's Instagram spotlight. Yet she had done something no amount of wealth could buy. She had saved his life without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return. And in that pure act of courage, Chuka had seen something rare, real, untouched. So when he walked out of the hospital, dressed in a sharp navy blue senator outfit, with bodyguards trailing behind and journalists clicking cameras from every corner, he was no longer just the billionaire businessman. He was a man with a mission. He was going to marry the nurse who saved him. The news broke on social media like a thunderclap. Breaking. Chief Chuka Nwosu engaged to Bariga nurse who saved his life. From ward to wedding, billionaire's proposal shocks nation. Some praised it as a love story from heaven. Others questioned if it was publicity. A few even mocked it, calling it a fairy tale for the poor. But none of it mattered to Chuka. He didn't propose with flashy drama. No choir, no helicopter, just a quiet evening in a private garden within his Banana Island compound. He had invited Ifeoma under the pretense of thanking her with a dinner. She had resisted coming, overwhelmed by the attention already surrounding her, but eventually agreed after much persuasion. She arrived in a simple Ankara dress, no makeup, just herself. He met her at the gate. No security fuss, just a man in love. They walked through a path lined with flowers and soft lights. The scent of hibiscus filled the air. A small table was set with candles and fresh jollof rice, peppered chicken, and fried plantains, her favorite meal, which he had somehow discovered. Halfway through the evening, he stood up and said the words that would echo through her entire life. Ifeoma Obilo, I've conquered companies. I've mastered markets. But I've never met a woman who made me feel as safe as you did when I was dying. He went down on one knee and opened a small wooden box. Inside wasn't just a ring. It was a question that shook her world. Will you marry me? For days, Ifeoma couldn't sleep. Everyone had an opinion. Her cousin cried tears of joy. Her colleagues at the hospital took selfies with her. The internet exploded with blogs digging through her old Facebook pictures. Strangers followed her to church and tried to touch her shoulder for favor. But inside her heart, it wasn't noise she heard. It was fear. She had never been loved before. Not like this. Not publicly. Not by someone who lived in a mansion where the floors could swallow her entire apartment in Bariga. What if it didn't work? What if she disappointed him? What if the world laughed when she failed to fit into his world? Then she remembered the night of the attack. She had moved without thinking. Not for glory, not for thanks, for life. And now, life was calling again. This time with a ring. So she answered. Yes, the wedding wasn't rushed. Chuka insisted on giving her time. He sent tutors to coach her on etiquette, not to change her, but to make her confident. He flew her parents from Enugu and bought them a new bungalow they never even asked for. He invited his business associates and told them plainly, "This is the woman I'm marrying. She saved my life. The rest is your business." Some doubted her. Many envied her, but none could ignore her. And Ifeoma, she glowed, not because of the designer clothes or the private stylist or the way the media fawned over her, but because, for the first time, she was seen, truly seen, for the courage that had always lived in her bones, for the kindness that had always burned in her heart. At the traditional marriage in Enugu, the entire village turned out. The bride who once walked barefoot to fetch water was now being welcomed with drums and dancing. Women ululated, elders smiled, even children followed her around like she was royalty. She remained calm, humble, grateful. The day she walked into the church in a white flowing gown, with a veil that shimmered under sunlight, Chief Chuka Nwosu waited at the altar, eyes locked only on her. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," Lagos thundered with applause. But beyond the noise, beyond the headlines, beyond the camera flashes, it was just two souls that had met in the most unlikely moment, bound not by status, but by fate. Married life came with its own winds and storms, but Ifeoma stood firm, like the nurse who once faced down armed robbers on a Lagos highway. Now she walked across polished marble floors, dined with dignitaries, and sat beside one of the most powerful men in Nigeria. But she never forgot her roots. Banana Island had never seen a bride like her. She didn't come with pedigree or powerful family ties. She brought something richer: humility, compassion, and a heart that refused to harden with wealth. Even the staff of Chuka's household, cooks, cleaners, and security, felt it. She knew their names. She thanked them. She saw them. The tabloids tried to stir drama. Did the nurse trap the billionaire with pity? Was it real love or a gratitude fling? But Chuka silenced all critics when he publicly named her as co-founder of a new foundation, the Obolo Trust for Women in Crisis. With an initial funding of 500 million naira, it would provide scholarships, housing, and medical care for underprivileged women across Nigeria. She was a nurse who helped others before she ever knew me, he said at the launch. Now, we help together. Ifeoma used the money not to flaunt, but to heal. She returned to her former hospital, not in tears, but with trucks of new medical supplies. She renovated the emergency ward. She increased the salaries of underpaid nurses. The matron wept, and yet she remained untouched by pride. One Saturday morning, while preparing breakfast in the state-of-the-art kitchen, Chuka walked in, arms crossed, watching her with amusement. "You still fry your own akara?" She smiled. "If I stop now, what will I fry in heaven?" They both laughed. Love lived in their silence, in the way he adjusted her chair before dinner, in how she placed her palm gently on his chest at night, right where the bullet wound had been, a constant reminder. Life is fragile, and every moment counts. Months turned to years. They traveled the world together. London, Seychelles, Istanbul. But Ifeoma always found her way back to Enugu, her village. She didn't return to show off. She returned to give back. The borehole she installed now served 5 hamlets. The widow whose roof once leaked danced under a brand new zinc sheet. Children who once trekked barefoot now wore shoes with their names printed inside. But her biggest transformation wasn't external. She had once been overlooked, underpaid, underestimated. Now, she was a symbol of possibility. A poster on many hospital walls bore her smiling photo with a caption, "You never know who you're saving or what they might become in your life." Her marriage with Chuka was not perfect. They argued like any couple. They disagreed on investments, on whether to keep security tight or live freely. But what they never lost was respect. He never belittled her voice. She never used his wealth as a weapon. Together, they built more than a home. They built legacy. One year, on their wedding anniversary, Chuka took her back to the exact road where their fates crossed. The place had changed. More streetlights, less danger. But the memory lived untouched. He stopped beside the new signboard that now marked the place. Ifeoma Obilo Rescue Point. It was a protected zone with CCTV cameras, a police post, and an emergency phone booth installed in her honor. Chuka turned to her and asked, "Do you ever wonder, what if you had walked a different route that night?" She looked at him, full of the quiet strength he'd come to love. "No," she said softly, "because I think destiny doesn't wait on direction. It finds you where you're meant to be." He nodded, and under that fading orange sunset, he kissed the nurse who had become his wife, his mirror, and his greatest fortune. In the years that followed, the story of how a poor nurse saved a billionaire grew beyond Nigeria. International press covered it. Documentaries were made. Universities used her life as a case study in ethics and courage. But to Ifeoma, it was never about fame. It was about one truth, that greatness doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a uniform soaked in blood, on a roadside where everyone else drives away, in the moment you choose to help, even when no one's watching.